Welcome back to Trail and Overtraining Training. My name is Will France. I'm a running coach and a strength coach, and the whole goal of this podcast is to help you train a little better so that you can perform better and have more fun out on the trails. If you like this information, I'd really appreciate it if you subscribed or left a rating or review, or even just shared it with somebody. All of those things help spread this to more people so that we can get more good training information out and spread the message, right? So today I want to continue our discussion on strength training essentials. And we've already done 2 of these. They were a couple of past 5 episodes, and we've already discussed 2 of the big 5 or whatever movements that comprise strength training. So we've already done squat and then an upper body push movement, which would include a horizontal or a vertical push. Today, I want to talk about a hinge, and a hinge is another lower body movement. This would often be considered a lower body pull or a hip dominant movement. And if you have no idea what these things are, deadlifts. Deadlifts are hinges. Now, the biggest difference between a hinge and a squat is the amount of relative knee bend to hip bend. You can bend at the hips. Think about sitting on the floor with your legs straight out in front of you, right? You are able to bend at the hips without bending your knees. Whereas a squat, we bend our knees and hips in more or less the same rate, at more or less the same rate as we go down. So hinges are incredibly important for multiple reasons. One, there's as a larger existence as you move through the world, they convey your ability to move your center of mass back, to move your body back in space. And when I say back, I mean when we stand and your body and your torso is over your feet. When we squat, we're actually keeping our center of mass still directly over our feet. When we hinge, we're actually pushing our center of mass back behind our feet, and it allows us to manipulate a bunch of things that are very important through existing in the world, and also just very important in athleticism, right? When we think about running downhill, you have to be slowing down. And when you are slowing down, we can only do that a few different ways. Now, I know that we often talk about not slowing or whatever magic that we think happens, but if you're running downhill, you have to slow down, or else you would continue accelerating until you hit terminal velocity, right? This is or the coefficient of friction or whatever weird physics stuff we want to talk about, but you have to be slowing down with every step, or else you would just keep getting faster until realistically you fell down, right? So there has to be a slowing nature, and as people who run often on trails and mountain things and have a lot of up and down, then this is going to show up a lot. So this is not as relevant if you were going to run the Chicago Marathon, right? This is actually the exact opposite problem, where it's the same muscle activation all the time. Whereas when we have hills involved in our running, we need to be slowing on the downhill. Now, you're going to pick up pace a little bit. There's going to be a little bit of acceleration, etc. But once we find that steady downhill pace, every step is going to be braking a bit. Now, we can do this in a few different ways. And ideally, either at the same time or throughout a race, we'll use all of them so that we don't get overly fatigued in one position or another. And if you're strong enough, your body's probably just going to do this for you. So, you may or may not know that when you look at a professional marathoner, their gait, their stride, their cadence, a lot of things are not exactly the same at the end as it was at the beginning. And some of that is not really an intentional choice. This is an ability to adjust movement mechanics after you beat the hell out of yourself for 20 miles so that you can slightly change the muscle engagement at the end so you are still able to recruit as many muscle fibers as possible. Now, if we just are strong enough and practice enough and can do this naturally, then we tend to get very good at things like downhill running. And downhill running, in part, is going to be stability of foot and ankle. It is going to be a lot of things, and it is going to be strength of your lower body. So when we slow on the downhill, it can either be this eccentric quad contraction. Eccentric means like the down phase of a squat. So when you're running downhill, your knee is slightly bending, which means you're like catching yourself and you're flexing your quad. Now, what happens when you do that is a lot of muscle damage. And this is why your quads get smoked on the downhill. Now, that's all well and good, and that's going to be an essential part of doing this. If your hamstrings are strong enough, then we can take some of that load off, and we will do better, and we will train the hamstrings partially in a hinge movement. Now, the other thing that running is a hip thrust, right? Like a hip extension. You're pushing your foot behind you. And we talked a little bit about this in the squat, but it is even more visible in a hinge where we're not really even moving the knee, so we're not getting that quad contraction as much, but we're driving the entirety of it with our hips. We're using our glutes a lot. So the hinge is an important movement for people, and it is a really important movement for running performance. And we can look at a few different types of this, but we have to understand that for a lot of runners and a lot of athletes in general, this might be a difficult movement to find because it requires you to not really bend your knees and put your weight back in your heels, which when you run, you tend to bend your knees and put your weight forward in your toes because we're going here, right? Like we're running forward. And when we take a minute and try to not do this mechanism that we've done a lot of times, it can be challenging. It can take a while for someone to learn how to hinge properly. It is faster if you have a decent coach in person. I can usually knock this out in a few minutes, very honestly, if we're in person. But when we're on the internet or if you're doing this yourself, you have to be very diligent about figuring out weight management and exactly how things work. Now, this is not to scare you. You're not going to hurt yourself. You just might do it wrong. An example is a deadlift is probably going to turn into a little more of a squat, and you're going to have to constantly remind yourself to fix that, and it's okay. Just record yourself on video so you see why it's wrong, compare it across, send me the video. I don't care. I'm happy to help you. I like doing this stuff. But we're looking to create this like hip dominant movement, and it is not supposed to be a squat, so avoid the knee bend. Now let's look at a few of the movements that fall into this. One, as I've said multiple times, is a deadlift. Now we have a few different varieties of this. There's a few different varieties and a few different like machines and mechanisms we can do here. I really like a deadlift. It, as I said, can be very hard for some runners for a few different reasons. One, a lot of runners have fairly long legs. That's why they got good at running. I have very short legs, so I don't have to pull a bar very hard or very far to get it up to my hips. If you're very tall, deadlifts are going to be harder for you. So you might need to make some adjustments. You can either elevate the bar on some like mats, or you can like slowly make some tweaks as needed. But deadlift is basically the weight is in a dead stop on the ground. You push your hips back, grab a bar, try to keep your shins vertical, brace your torso really solidly, and then drive your hips forward, push through your entire foot, and come up to standing. And then reverse that motion to come back down. We're not looking for a bunch of like forward knee tracking. The knee should be behind the toes, and the weight should be a little in the heels at the start, and then push through the whole foot to bring it up to top. Different varieties of this are going to be a conventional deadlift. This is where your feet are, and this would be more in relevance to like using a straight bar. So, but this is more in relevance to using a straight bar, but we can also talk about this with using different pieces of equipment. So for a conventional deadlift on a straight bar, your feet are going to be right underneath your hips as you grab the bar slightly outside your legs. A sumo is your feet are wider, turned out more at like a 45-degree angle. Knees are going to be out in line with the toes. We always want the knees in line with the toes for these, almost always. And other than that, same kind of movement. Sit back, keep knees out, grab the bar in between your legs, and then drive your hips forward to come to top. Sumo deadlifts and sumo squats tend to be frequently prescribed movements for runners. I do a lot because when we're running, we're constantly moving forward in this like straight plane of motion. And as a result, we don't use our hip abductors. We don't use our glute medius a lot. And we can end up with things like IT band friction syndrome or high hamstring tendinopathy because we just don't have that lateral stability from the glute med, and instead we just keep driving forward. So if we do something like a sumo deadlift, we can build these hip abductors and accessory glute muscles in a way that's like really beneficial to the, we'll call it average, I don't have a better word, runner, right? So conventional deadlift and a sumo deadlift. Let's take a short pause and go back to conventional. You can do this with, actually you can do both of these with many things. The straight bar is standard because it's an easy and like very normal piece of equipment that you'll find everywhere. But you can do this with a kettlebell. Same kind of stance positioning, either feet a little more narrow or feet wider. You can do this with 2 kettlebells for a conventional version. You can probably do it with 2 kettlebells for a sumo version. You can do this with a trap bar. A trap bar deadlift is a little different than a conventional, but it's more or less the same. And you can use a bunch of weight. A trap bar or a hex bar is like this hexagonal shaped bar with handles that you stand inside and it traps you inside. So I'm a huge fan of a trap bar for everyone, really. There are some reasons the conventional deadlift shines in terms of hamstring movement, but otherwise the trap bar is great. It is really hard to do any sort of sumo lifting, impossible really if you're going to do it properly on a trap bar. So sumo is kind of out for this, but otherwise it's fine. Now, other forms of deadlift that I find useful are like a single leg deadlift, and this can either be from the ground or I do more of what we're going to talk about next, Romanian version for this. But the increased support and ability or like necessity to stabilize your hips as you go through a single leg deadlift is incredibly valuable, especially for runners later in season. Because later in season, we're not going to be trying to move, for most people, we're not going to be trying to move as much weight. We're not going to be trying to go like really heavy on these deadlifts. So we have to find a way to challenge it in a different way because just going light does nothing, right? Like if you're not challenging your movements, then we're not actually making progress. So instead of doing 100 pounds on a deadlift when you can do 250, we should scale the pattern so that the pattern is more challenging and you can use less weight to get stimulus somehow, right? And a single leg is a great way to do this because most people I know cannot, in fact, everyone I know cannot single leg deadlift half of their normal deadlift. So there's a huge stability component here. There's a big control component, and it is a valuable thing to develop as a runner since this is a single leg sport, more or less. So single leg deadlift, really valuable. And then a Romanian deadlift is also valuable for a Romanian or a stiff leg deadlift. These are not the same, but they're the same enough that it doesn't matter, if we're going to be honest. If you were a power lifter trying to like really nitpick your accessory movements, then we could quibble over the difference between a Romanian deadlift or a stiff leg deadlift. For most people, it just doesn't matter. You're trying not to bend your knees more than you need to on either of these movements in like just short of locked out. And you're going to move the bar up and down really close to your body, only hinging at the hips. A deadlift from the floor, a full like conventional deadlift is going to have for almost everyone a little bit more knee bend because we're going to be a little stronger if we can get our hips lower and pull. It is a like full max weight movement. For Romanian deadlift, I'll often pick the bar up, start it at the hips, slight bend in the knees, shift your weight back into the heels as the bar drops straight down, often dragging down your legs. and then drive your hips forward and pull through your whole foot to come forward. If you want an example of this, like check my YouTube channel. I realize this is really hard on audio, but Romanian deadlifts are great movement for the hamstrings and an incredible movement for what you might consider lower back strength, right? Like a lot of the muscles, and we'll get more into this next week, but a lot of the muscles in the back that we think of as the lower back should probably be better considered as like the intrinsic or deep muscles of the back. Because something like your erector spinae isn't just in your low back. It attaches on your pelvis, but it goes like really far up your rib cage. And these muscles don't like create force very well. When we do something like a Superman where we lay on our face and hinge, we're like barely using them to their fullest capacity and just like rubbing our face on a dirty gym floor. What can do really well for these muscles is something like a Romanian deadlift or a heavy deadlift, because they respond to load more than they create it. So if we really want to train these muscles, the foundation should be something like a heavy hinge, a heavy Romanian deadlift. And then if those are maxed out and you still need to train the intrinsic muscles of your back for some reason, then we can talk about some version of like glute hyperextensions or 45-degree extensions or any of these things. But if we're not doing heavy deadlifts first, then we're missing almost all of the progress that we can actually make in this structure that everybody talks about being weak. So doing heavy deadlifts, be it conventional, sumo, Romanian, anything that puts you at this hinged forward position where the deeper muscles of your back have to respond to a bunch of load, is the best thing you can do for what is often referred to as low back strength, right? Now, other movements that exist here, these would be more what I would consider accessory movements. Hip thrust is a big one, and there's a big debate about this, largely spurred by the guy who invented it or popularized it. I don't know the history enough to know, but is the hip thrust a good exercise? Probably. There's a lot of complication here made for no reason. Now, a couple of things about the hip thrust. Most people do not fail at the hip thrust from their inability of their glutes to create force. Now, what is the hip thrust? You lay on your back. You don't lay on your back. You put your shoulder blades like on a bench or a box, and then you put a barbell over your hips, and then you bend your knees and put your feet flat on the floor, and then you thrust upwards with your hip. And if you've ever seen like a tabletop yoga where you like have your, or like an old crab walk position when we were kids, you put your hands down, your hips or your shoulders and up to your knees are kind of flat in a table, and then your shins are vertical as the other end of the tabletop. That's more or less what a hip thrust is. And it can be a really good movement. It is not my shining example of a movement, partially because the glutes are usually not the failure point. You have a bunch of load directly on your pelvis, and what needs to happen for you to be forceful here is to really squeeze your abdomen as hard as possible so your pelvis tucks underneath, and then you can force a bunch of load up with your glutes. However, most people are going to lose that abdominal control far before their glutes burn out. And if that's the case, then we're kind of missing the point of the big drive there, especially when we're looking at heavy stuff. I think the hip thrust shines best as a higher rep, lower weight movement. I'm doing them now in my programming. It's not that I think they're useless. It's just that I don't think they're best for a lot of runners who are only going to lift 1 to 3 times a week and trying to do it as a heavy movement. If you were trying to win a bikini competition on stage, there's a large argument to be made for doing these in every variety possible, because you're probably training your glutes 6 days a week. But for most of us, I train nobody like that, right? From my in-person gym job to online to runners to like my 80-year-old osteoporosis clients to like my 17-year-old just trying to get stronger. Nobody fits that bill. So hip thrust is a heavy movement, not my favorite, but I do think it has a purpose for certain people. Now, it can be a great way to teach glute drive, and it can be a great accessory movement if we're not trying to put as much stress on the quads. So again, has a place. It's an accessory movement. It's very much a hinge movement, and it is also very applicable to running because of that hip extension you're creating at the top. But it is not necessarily the shining example that some people might make it out to be on the internet. And just short tirade. This is one of those things when you see studies, right? There's a lot of studies that make the hip thrust seem much better than it is. And a lot of that is because it's, one, easier to teach than a really good squat. So if we're going to teach someone how to properly back squat, it's going to take many weeks. In fact, it might take the entire amount of weeks that the study is. So if you're trying to create progress quickly, then using a simpler movement like the hip thrust is probably the way to go, right? It's the same idea if I had to get someone ready in 2 months for the athletic performance of their life, and that's all I had time-wise for them, I probably wouldn't spend a lot of time teaching to squat. We'd probably use a lot of leg press because we just need to create the performance, right? So it's like understanding where we're coming from. And it's also novel. A lot of people have squatted quite a lot, and they haven't done a lot of hip thrusts. So when we add that novelty in, you see a performance boost. There's so many things that complicate studies when it comes to strength training that we have to use a little bit of logic and see what the movement patterns actually are. Anyway, back to hinge stuff. Now, these would be accessory stuff. When I talk about squats, I talk about leg extensions because the squat is a very quad-heavy movement, so I want to talk about the accessories when we look at a quad. Same idea here. We're going to talk about hamstring stuff. So you have a few different brands of this. I really like a seated hamstring curl if you need to get stronger hamstrings. You can move a ton of weight through it. Pretty easy to get up to your body weight of movement through a seated hamstring curl. Easy's wrong. Pretty quickly achievable, though, for a lot of people. And we can really force a lot of weight and a lot of strength in the hamstrings through a seated hamstring curl. Lying hamstring curl tends to feel harder, but it's also, much like the hip thrust, not... People tend to fail by lifting their hips off the bench before they actually fail in their hamstrings. So I think it's a useful movement, but I would almost always, for someone who's not training 3, 4, 5 times a week of lifting, I would almost always go the seated hamstring curl from a sheer strength perspective. And then we also have something like Nordics, where you strap your feet under something, have your knees, and then hinge forward at your knees. They're super hard. I know nobody personally who can do them unassisted, other than my father when he was in college. And he used it as like a party trick. Man was strong. I don't know what to say. There's also hamstring sliders, where we'll put our feet on sliders, or you can just use socks on a tile or a wood floor. You'll bridge up into a hip bridge position and then slide your knees out or feet out until your knees are straight, and then pull your heels back. These are hard, but they're also really safe, and they're a thing you can do at your house. So I make fairly heavy use of these. They're fairly frequent use of these, I guess, depending where someone is in their training. And finally, just to cover the last muscle in the back of the leg, quick shout out to calf training. I think we both make too much and too little of calf training sometimes as runners. A straight leg calf raise can be useful. I think it's more useful often as a PT mechanism. And then early in the season, I like to put some heavy load through the soleus by doing bent knee calf raises, which is a deeper muscle of the calf, because this is what we should actually be using a ton as distance runners. But instead, it's kind of weak, and we just end up moving around it by having bad running form. So seated calf raises are a really valuable thing to have. Scale load, because you should be using that muscle a lot when you run, but having them in and throughout your year can be really valuable. Anyway, hinge, really good movement, essential to a functioning life. Anytime you pick something up off the ground, it is probably going to be at least part of that movement is going to be a hinge. And It is defined as a movement from the hips and that doesn't really incorporate the knees as much as we would a squat. If we were going to look at how to program these throughout our running year, I like heavy deadlifts in your off season so that we can build that big, like systemic central nervous system response, teach the body to work as an entire unit. And then we can scale down by shifting more towards like single leg deadlifts or Romanian deadlifts or I had thought in my head, something like a single arm dumbbell snatch is more of a hip hinge than it is a squat. It's a really explosive movement, and like I'll put that in like plyometric phases of training because it does require a lot, but the limiting factor is often going to be either your shoulder strength or just like the coordination of the movement. So it's not going to be a big stress on the hamstrings, and the glutes, but it still allows them to work, right? And then all of these are useful throughout the year. We just got to scale them as we go. So that is the third of our like 5, whatever, we'll figure it out, probably 5 big movement categories. And if you have any questions, please shoot me a message. I would love to help you with this stuff. And I hope you have a great rest of your day. Thank you again for listening to the Trail and Ultra Running Training Podcast. I can't tell you how much I appreciate it. Just a reminder, nothing you hear on this podcast is medical advice, and you should always speak with a medical professional before making changes to your training or your nutrition. If you enjoyed the podcast or found it helpful, please leave a rating or review. It tells the algorithm robots that people like it, and that means more people will hear it. Or even better, just share it with someone who you think would benefit. If you prefer a video version, head to the Trail and Ultra Running Training Group on Facebook or check out the Mountain Goat Endurance Coaching YouTube channel. Thank you again, and I hope you have a great next run.